Hello everyone, welcome back. In our previous session, we have started with the introduction of our job, that is to connect to our database and then do some extraction from a given table. So let's come back to the MySQL workbench. So here I have the MySQL workbench window and I'm creating a database for our data operations. We shall also create a table and then insert some values to the table. So our idea is to extract the table details or do a select from the table and see the results in our Talend console. We do that using a Talend job. So before we switch to the Talend job, let's go ahead and create a database and create a table and add data to the table in MySQL. So here I'm creating a database. Let's give this name as Talend_DB. Okay, we have the database created. Let's go ahead and switch to this. Use Talend_DB. Right, we have switched to that. Go ahead and create a table. Let's give the table as employee_table and let's pass the fields. Let's give it as, let's take an ID, employee_ID, which would be an integer. Let's give the length as 10 and let's pass this as not null, and I would create a auto increment for this. Next would be our employee_name. All right, and this is, what is this? This is a varchar. This is a varchar of length. Let's give this as 50, and this is also a not null column. Yep, let's give this as 2 columns, and then let's take a primary key as emp_id. Go ahead and run this. We have the table created. Let's go ahead and do some insert into the data. Insert into emp_table. That's the table name. Let's give the values. Let's employee ID be 123. Okay, it's a numeric 123, and then let the employee name be John. We're just going with 2 columns here, which is take an ID and then a name, just to give this as a simple job, and then we will go ahead and try working with the columns of larger sizes and we will see how can we do that. Okay, and let's give this as 1 2 4 and the employee, let this be Mark. All right, does this look good? Yeah, it looks good to me. Go ahead and execute this. We have the data inserted into the table. Let's do a quick select. Employee_table. There we have the data. We have 2 rows. For one, the employee ID is 1 2 3 and the employee name is John, and we have 1 to 4 and the employee name is Mark. Okay, now let's come back to our studio and let's see our previous job that we have created. Now let's come to the DB connection. Here we would want to specify all these properties. For now, I'm closing this palette so that there is a clean view of the properties that we're doing. And I'm also minimizing this. Okay. Yep. Now we have good view of all the components in the job. That's easy. Let's come back. See here. So we have a TDB connection and we have specified the database as MySQL, and let this property type in DB version be as this. So like I have a MySQL 8 version. In case you have a different version, you can go ahead and do this change to MySQL 5 in case you have that. Otherwise, the MySQL I'm using is on a version 8, so I'll leave it as is. And now keep the schema as built-in. In our upcoming sessions, I would explain the difference between the built-in property type and the repository property type. All right. Now, these are the properties that we want to pass to establish a connection to the database that we're trying to connect using this Talend job. So how do we get these properties? One way is to come to your MySQL workbench, go to the database and manage connections. Here you would see these host name and the port numbers that you have used to connect to this MySQL workbench or the MySQL database. You know the MySQL database name, that's Talend_DB. So now you have all these properties ready. So let me go ahead and copy. The username is root and I have my password also as root. I don't want to see that here. I'll directly give it there. So let me close this, come back to the Talend. This is my host name, or this is nothing but my host address, and the port is same 3306. And the database is, I know the database name, that is Talend_DB. So whatever the database that you create, or in case you're working with an existing database, pass that database name in the double quotes. All the parameters we would be passing in the double quotes. It's important to have the double quotes, else the connection parameters would be treated as strings and it leads to a failure in establishing a connection. And the username is root. The password is also, so I've given the password here. Let everything be the same for now. Just go ahead and change this. This is our MySQL connection, and let's leave it there. Okay, here we can always go ahead and give a trigger associated for MySQL. We can come back and say on component OK and connect to this input component. I would explain in our next session what is this trigger and what are the different options that we have in trigger and why do we need all of them and when can we use all of this. For now, just bear with me and then understand this something like this part or this DB input and the tlogro components would be executed only when there is a successful connection established to a MySQL database. Just take it like that for now. And that check would be done by on component. In our next session, we will see what are the differences and why do we need this logical connection to be established between that, and how can we, there would be scenarios when we don't need this link to be established between two components also. We'll see all of that in our next session. Let's come back to this input component. And here, this component is looking for all of these properties. Here, if you see, these are the same ones. And here, these are the hostname, database, and username, and all of this. And there is a query that we want to extract from the table. And we have a schema that we want to specify similar to the table that we have created in our database. All right. Here, you have an option of using an existing connection. And that is why we have explicitly created a connection here. You can always go ahead and pass these parameters directly in the MySQL input component or the TDB input component and run the query and get the results to your next component, either to the tlogro or tfile output delimited, whatever is the following component that you have. However, in a real-time scenario, you would be working with various queries and various tables, and you might want to perform different operations using different components. In order to avoid a rework of giving all these connections in every component that you would create, we would go ahead and explicitly create a connection, and Talend gives an option to use the connection in our entire job. Whatever the component that requires a connection to a MySQL database, that can use this existing connection. Okay, let's go ahead and check this box. Immediately, you would see all the properties that are asking for the host name and the username and the database name, all of that are gone. All you have to do is simply come to this component list. There is a drop down here. Go ahead and select your connection. That's it. This would use the same connection and run this query in the table, in the database, and then get the results to our next linked components. I think that's pretty much clear. Let's go ahead and simply do a select star. Select star from our table name is nothing but emp underscore table. So here, how does this know the database name? Ideally, you might want to append or you might want to prefix the database name followed by the table name. However, since we have mentioned the database name here, we are skipping that here. In case you are working with different databases, it is advised to prefix the database name prior to the table name. So let's go ahead and run this. And before that, we have to create a schema. When you click on this ellipse, you would see a window like this asking for the schema. We have seen this similar window for the T input file delimited also. And we have given the column names that are here. So go ahead and give the column names. So let me give the same column names, employee ID. And this is of type integer. The second one is employee name. And this is of type string varchar. Okay, both of them are non-nullable, and this is of length 10 and this is of length 50. Okay, and we have seen what does this do in our previous sessions. This would propagate the schema that we have defined in this component to the next components that are linked in the job. All right, let's go ahead and click on yes, so that the T log row gets the same schema. You can see that T log row also has the same schema here. Okay, now let's go ahead and run this job. It's building, and yes, there we have the results. It's 1 to 3 John and 1 to 4 Mark. Let me do a small change here. I want to see this in form of a table. So in the T log row, so I came back to the table and I reran the job. There it is. You see the two records that are there in your MySQL workbench table. We have retrieved them using our Talend job and we have displayed them in our console. For a quick cross check, you can go back and run this again in the MySQL, and there we have the same data that it is available in the table also. All right, so I think it is clear on how to build a simple job to do a select from the table in a given database. All you have to do, if you have a different database that it is there in your local machines, go ahead and create connection and change the connection to whatsoever database it is and make the necessary property changes and try working with the same components. I'm sure you would be able to do it in a pretty much easy way. And in our next session, we would go ahead and see how can we update the data and perform some other operations on the tables, and how can we store the data to output file and all that.